All right, so let's talk about exactly what this evolution of the mission means. Join me now by three MPs now. In Winnipeg, I've got the Parliamentary Secretary of the Minister of National Defence, James Bezan. In St. John's, I've got the NDP Defence Critic, Jack Harris. And via Skype from Kelowna, the Liberal Defence Critic, Joyce Murray. Mr. Bezan, now you've got General Lawson saying that the mission has evolved. Can you give us some idea, what has it evolved? What is this evolution?
Well, he was talking about the situation on the ground has evolved, and that refers to, in my opinion, how things are going with the training, what type of capabilities Iraqi security forces have, and of course, as we've gone into this with our CF-18s and our air task force that was approved by Parliament for combat missions, we want to make sure those combat missions by our air task force is effective.
Should you have said when this was approved that for our CF-18s to be effective, we will need the special forces on the ground to be working in coordination near or at the front lines to help paint the targets? Should that have been more explicitly said, so when parliamentarians were voting on this or when Canadians were understanding this, we would have had a better picture? Or at the time, did you simply not expect that and the situation has changed?
Look, we've been very clear that the Special Operations Forces themselves would not be involved in combat. What happened last week was definitely a situation of self-defense. As we've talked before, Evan, they're there planning, scoping out an exercise that was going to take place when they came under fire and returned that fire. As General Lowe said, that they have on 13 different occasions have painted targets for coalition airstrikes. And I think all of us want to make sure that precision-guided missiles are falling where they're supposed to fall. And I know that Canada and our partners have peace of mind when we are confident that we are hitting our targets.
Yeah, but clearly it's evolved. And just one last statement. You know, you say it's not a combat mission. I had General Lou Mackenzie, of course, who commanded the peace mission in the Balkans here yesterday. And he said, I had Steve Day, who was the commander of the Special Forces, the JTF-2, the same people that are in the field right now. And they both said they defy me to ask any of those people, when someone's shooting at you and you're shooting back and killing them, if I said, by the way, you weren't actually in combat, they said, of course we're in combat. They say essentially this is, you're playing political games. Doesn't mean that you definitely, they're sending out all the time, but that's combat. It's hard. How is that not combat?
But I think what you're missing the point here is that what we're really talking about, it's combat is when you go in there, you're identifying targets, you're being aggressive, you're being direct, and you're employing all your firepower towards a common enemy. And in this situation, we were at the front line in a planning role, aid and assist. That's what we've said right from the get-go. Nothing has changed from that. All the operations of the Canadian Armed Forces, whether it be in the air or on the ground, is in respect to the motion that was passed by Parliament, and one that we have tasked them with. But we've given them the equipment to go out there and defend themselves and employ the mission as defined by Parliament.
Jack Harris, what's your take on that?
Well, first of all, Evan, I want to comment about the overview presented up front. John Kerry talking about the 2,000 airstrikes. Canada, in fact, was involved in 22 airstrikes. So the question is, what is Canada's contribution to all of this? Over half of those airstrikes were called in by our Special Operations Forces, who are at or near the front lines, 20% of the time. When you're that close and you're within range of machine gun fire, engagement in combat and returning fire, nobody objects to somebody's firing at you, you fire back. That's not a question here. The question here is, are you engaged in a combat mission? Is it different than what was asked specifically and denied specifically by the Chief of Defence Staff, by the DND as late as December to the Wall Street Journal? We're only into January now. The evolution hasn't taken place since then. And Mr. Nicholson is claiming that this was all contemplated from the very beginning. Well, that's not the response that we got from the Prime Minister when Thomas Mulcair specifically asked, are we going to be in the combat zones? Are we going to be painting targets? No, 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 we're going to be, this is not a combat mission.
So what do you want?
We're not
Do you
going
want
to be
another vote now?
What I want is some honesty and from this government, and not playing the kind of political games that we're kind of engaged in here now, saying, oh, well, they're planning and up at the front lines and they're doing a planning mission at the front lines and not expected to be engaged in combat because nobody's going to fire on them. That's not that's not being upfront with the Canadian people. If Mr. Harper and the government wanted to have a combat mission and make the case for that, well, then they should have made that in Parliament. They didn't do that. They wanted Canadians to think that we're just doing behind the wire, I think was the phrase that was used, and that comes from the Afghanistan war. Behind the wire meant basically on the base in Kandahar, away from the potential for firefights and away from the potential. That's the phrase that was used. That's what Canadians were told, so we were misled. That's the point here.
Okay, let me bring in Joyce Murray. Joyce Murray, what's your take on how Mr. Bezan has characterized the evolution of the mission?
Well, I think that what Mr. Bezan is not doing is focusing on the key issue here, which is that the Prime Minister has not been open and honest with Canadians. In bringing in the troops, of course we support the troops, and all Canadians would agree that that the troops must fire back to protect themselves. The issue is that there was, I think this is, Jack said it as well, that there's been a number of meetings in which the government was absolutely clear that there would not be frontline combat by the ground troops. In fact, I, at a meeting, a committee meeting in November, asked Major General Michael Hood, who's the Director of Strategic Joint Staff, would there be close combat advising, which means ground troops accompanying the Iraqi troops to the front lines, and he said no. So the Prime Minister said no, the Minister said no, the General said no, but now we're finding out that that's exactly what's happening, and we just want the Prime Minister and the Minister to be open and honest.
But you said you want them to be open and honest, but you want another vote on it.
No, I want the Prime Minister. We know that it's a majority parliament. So what we do want is that if there's a change of mission, and when there's a change of mission, then the Prime Minister has a responsibility to level with Canadians that things have changed. And so instead, there's been contradictory statements by the Minister, the Prime Minister, and the Chief of Defence Staff, which creates confusion for everyone.
You know, I got about a minute left. That's a debate that's going to happen on Monday, clearly, but we cannot let you all go without looking at the crisis going on in Yemen right now. Shia Houthi rebels besiege the presidential palace. Now the president and the prime minister of Yemen and the cabinet have all resigned. You remember that the Yemeni branch of al-Qaeda claimed responsibility for the Charlie Hebdo attack. Mr. Bezan, if Yemen plunges even deeper into a crisis, and it's in a crisis now, by the way, there's a fight between al-Qaeda, Yemen, and ISIS there. Does that pose a security threat to Canada? What is Canada's take on the crisis right now in Yemen?
Well, Minister Baird put out a statement earlier today, and he welcomes, as all Canadians do, that there is now a ceasefire that is in effect. We want to make sure that both sides respect it. We want to make sure they're respecting the UN Security Council and that they find a way forward in working with the Gulf Cooperation Council on how to find a peaceful and democratic solution now that they've had the resignation of the existing government. So hopefully that puts an end to the fighting. Of course, we have been concerned about the terrorist threat there. So we are going to continue to work with our allies and look forward to the lead that is coming from within Yemen itself with their own committees that they have established that was able to reach a ceasefire agreement and hopefully work alongside the United Nations to find a long-term peaceful and democratic solution.
Right. Well, Jack Harris, real quick on this. I mean, this is obviously a very fluid situation there.
It's a fluid situation. It's a fluid situation for sure. But the situation in Yemen has been serious for some time, and I think it's time we called on the Arab League that are involved in this now. But there's a serious situation amongst the Arab nations in the Middle East, and I think it's incumbent on them, with the United Nations, with the Security Council, to start trying to find some solutions that see the Arab nations play a stronger role in maintaining a peaceful situation in the Middle East. You know,
the U.S., Joyce Murray, has been very active with the now resigned Yemeni government fighting al-Qaeda AP, they call it AQAP, al-Qaeda on the Arabian Peninsula. Now that whole strategy is very much in jeopardy, and that could pose a security risk. How do you read what's going on there?
Well, Evan, a very complex situation. Canada always has had a constructive role in solution finding on the world stage. I'd like to see Canada play that kind of constructive role. But the Prime Minister, well, in sitting down and working together with other Western partners and other groups of countries involved. But when the Prime Minister can't be trusted in his own country to tell the truth about what's happening with our part of the coalition, it makes it more difficult for us to be trusted elsewhere.
So just so I'm clear, you're suggesting there's a link between the Prime Minister's ability to work with coalition partners in Yemen and what he said in Parliament about, I'm just trying to make the link there. What's the link there?
The link is about trust. Is Canada a country that can be trusted in being able to help develop peaceful solutions and democratic solutions to complex situations?
All right, I got to leave it there. James Bezan, Jack Harris, Joyce Moore. Obviously, we also got our eye on the situation with those Japanese hostages that are being held. The deadline's just hours away, by the way. ISIS plans to behead them. The Japanese government's watching this very closely. We've got our eye on it as well. Thanks to all three of you. I appreciate your time, as always.
Thank you, Evan.
Thanks, guys.